All right, my English teacher friends. So I come to you with yet another writing workshop video in which I teach teachers and students how to sustain cogent lines of reasoning. And in this case, I'm going to feature yet another one of my edible templates. In this case, I'm going to use Skittles instead of Goldfish crackers and Lay's potato chips. And the concept of Roy G. Biv, the colors of the rainbow, is really interesting because all a syllogism is, which is, as you guys know, the template I use for my body paragraphs, is a sequential chronological progression of logic. So this concept of a rainbow really works well in terms of weaving all the bit parts, all the dancing parts that occur simultaneously in a body paragraph. So I'll walk you through that. First thing I want to mention, though, before we get into the actual writing workshop is this. I always say to teachers when I work with them, you got to Bob Ross your instruction. There's a fundamental difference between the assigning of teaching and the direct, explicit teaching of it. So I always tell my teachers, get to the proverbial canvas and easel and paint with your students. Show them how to do this. So instead of just talking kind of pie in the sky ethereal about my templates, get to the canvas, get to the easel, and paint a few examples with them. What I'm going to show you in this particular writing workshop are my exemplars and models that I wrote for the purposes of demonstrating how to manipulate and pull the strings of my template for my students. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about how logic has a sequence, how logic has a chronology. And I remember the old acronym Roy G. Biv to remember the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right? And as students are proceeding through a body paragraph, they can follow these colors, and we're going to use Skittles to help us differentiate the bit parts and the dancing, moving parts that occur within a syllogistic body paragraph. So your requisite supplies for this writing workshop: a couple bags of Skittles and some Elmer's glue. So kids are going to be gluing their Skittles to their papers in order to see if they have sustained cogent lines of reasoning. So I stole this picture, and you can see I really stole it. I'm not supposed to be using it, but it's a perfect picture in terms of the idea of how to write about a poem. It's like a loom, right? There's so much going on in poetry analysis that you need a really sophisticated template or a student that just has incredible knack and alacrity with the language in order to pull all the various strings that need to occur for a good piece of literary analysis to occur. And the cool thing with my template is this: it gets kids away from doing single tasking things such as one paragraph tone, one paragraph diction, one paragraph syntax, one paragraph metaphor. In my template, you're going to see students begin to weave all the terms, devices, and techniques together in order to get to a couple of questions. What is the authorial intent? And how does the author construct meaning? Those are the two questions that are at the heart of literary analysis, and we'll demonstrate that for you. So what I did was I gathered a number of poems that have to deal with food. And the poem that I'm choosing to model my exemplars and my Bob Ross samples with is a poem entitled Divorced Fathers and Pizza Crusts by Mark Halliday. One question I often get from teachers is, don't kids just copy you when you Bob Ross so much? Well, here's the caveat and the kicker to that. Since I'm doing my analysis on divorced fathers and pizza crusts, kids cannot. Kids cannot. So it's off limits. So they had 10 other poems within this quasi-food category to choose from, but they cannot do the Mark Halliday poem. So that one's mine and mine alone. So that cuts down on the mimicry. So the question immediately becomes this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And my tacit response to that always is proceed syllogistically. So I'm going to assume that most people are familiar with my work at this stage of the game. So I'm going to give a real cursory, furtive drive through my explanation of the syllogistic method. If you want to do a deep dive into it, by all means, go into my YouTube channel. There are videos on there that discuss how I really teach inductive and deductive reasoning and the whole concept behind the syllogistic method. So, in brief, just to encapsulate it quickly, it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. So, Aristotle thunked it up when he was a teacher at his school called the Lyceum. And the rich boys in the neighborhood would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they'd often throw out these big, pithy, juicy, essential questions like, what is justice? And the great philosophical think tankers of the time, the philosophers and the students, would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of what justice is. And Aristotle was no different than any average run-of-the-mill composition teacher. And he said, why do some kids crush their arguments and some are just meh and some tank bomb it? They're all over the place, very discursive, tangential, like just can't hold up a line of reasoning. And he had a eureka moment one day and he said, I got it. My really good thinkers, my students that are gifted orators, they argue syllogistically. And what he meant by that is that they argue with a certain mathematical computative precision, going from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say premise number 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. You would say, Christian, that's very sad, that's very tragic, but you made a very cogent argument. That is bulletproof. And when our students argue, and we got to keep this in mind, all expository writing is an act of argumentation, even literary analysis, which is what we're going to focus on in this video. Even when students are writing literary analysis, they are by extension arguing. And what happens is this. In the first premise, they don't argue. They start with the second premise. And that's why when we read student work, so often it's plot heavy. It sounds like a Cliff Note summation, right? So they got to be arguing from top to bottom. And on FRQ1 in the AP Lang test, the College Board states 3 times explicitly in the directions, your argument must be central. And I like to utter those directions even to my AP literature students and my on-level students that are doing literary analysis. So the syllogistic method, if we wield it for the purposes of performing a poetry analysis, here's what it's going to look like. The first premise is an argument containing terms and or devices, techniques, and it's going to be 3 sentences. I'm going to model this for you a few times. To keep the centrality of the argument, I want that first premise to be 3 sentences long, and there's another reason for that. If you have a topic sentences, plural, instead of topic sentence, it opens the door for students to multitask, meaning they can take terms, devices, and techniques and link them together. Begin to see how the poem jigsaw intersects together instead of that, one paragraph tone, 1 paragraph syntax, 1 paragraph diction bag that they often do. So they got to begin to multitask the first premise. Second premise is the teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing in the form of textual support. The conclusion of the body paragraph, and again, I want to emphasize that, the conclusion of the body paragraph is the textual analysis, and this is where we echo back to the thesis, link back to the prompt, and shake hands with the promise of the first premise. All of this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences. For my template, no matter the expository mode, full active body paragraphs, 10 to 12 sentences. I contend that those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that students write just don't cut it. There's not enough in there to really substantiate anything. So I tend to avoid that. So I wrote this one, and you can see that I have colors of the rainbow represented by Skittles. Now, if we go back a couple of slides, I went too far. The first premise is an argument containing terms, devices, techniques, and it's going to be 3 sentences long. Students often ask this question, where do I begin my body paragraph? And I tell them, start where the author starts. So with Divorced Fathers and Pizza Crusts, start where Halliday starts. So you'll see my students transition with clauses like this right from the onset. It cues the reader into knowing that you have a chronology, a sequence, and that you're very organized, right? You're gonna be very cogent from top to bottom, and that you have a logical sequencing. So what I've done here is placed a Skittle next to every term, device, or technique that I mention. Now, I loaded this. I'm a good writer, so I'm able to do this. Typically, my students will do 2 or 3 things simultaneously. I have 5, and I don't want it to be a literary terms dumping ground, so I usually tell my students don't do more than 3. Like 3 is very active and very ambitious, but I've been doing this a long time, so I'm able to go 5, and I'm doing it just to Bob Ross it, just to give kids an idea of how to do it and how to weave everything together. So note how I put a Skittle next to each term, device, or technique. First premise is 3 sentences long, and I always say first premise is a promise. So we have the rainbow in here, Roy G. Biv. We stop at blue, because we're going to do the rest of the rainbow in our next body paragraph. So we have to find quotes and paraphrases for the red, the yellow, the orange, the green, and the blue. If we promise it in the first premise, we also have to have it in the second premise. So let me dive into this. Right from the onset, Halliday conjoins the logical link between divorced fathers and pizza crust. So by saying conjoined and logic, I'm basically getting into theme. In an AP language kind of sense, I'm at his logos, right? So by saying conjoined, I'm also at dichotomy, juxtaposition, binary, if I want to go that route, right? So he's creating a juxtaposition between divorce and pizza crust, right? So by saying conjoined, I've implied the term. You don't have to be explicit. I often like it when students are not so explicit and forthright in stating their terms, devices, techniques. So I got that indicated by red Skittle. Second sentence, relying on a long succession of short, simple declarative sentences, he established a matter-of-fact tone to lay the foundation for the assuredness of his central thesis. Syntax is going to be the yellow Skittle. So short, simple declarative sentences. Tone is going to be orange, and then thesis or theme is going to be green. Well, I have a third sentence. I'm going to go really big into this. Between the conjunctions and employment of enjambment, the concept of divorce is commonplace, and its impact on the individual and family is established. So for the conjunction and the enjambment, I got a blue Skittle. As I move to the second premise, so fourth sentence begins the second premise. I have to get quotes and paraphrases. So I need something for the red, the yellow, the orange, the green, the blue. Now, this is how you get kids to quote with deliberation. Nothing's going to be haphazard in what I do. All the quotes are going to be exact. So I'll need quotes and paraphrases for red, yellow, orange, green, and blue. And you teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. Don't do one far more at the expense of the other. And then you just go in order, right? Just kind of have right at it. So look at where I go in the fourth sentence. I'm going to start quoting. Immediately, Halliday informs us that the connection between divorced fathers and pizza crust is understandable. So look at that. I just quoted, right? I got a red quote because I'm talking about conjoining the logical link between fathers and pizza crust. I got to analyze that. The juxtaposition is clear. Pizza crust and divorced dads are one and the same because divorced fathers do not cook confidently and because kids love pizza, right? So I'm also into that logo. So I got the yellow Skittle here. So you got quotes and paraphrases for all the colors here. You dropped it in the promise of the first premise. You got to drop it in the second premise as well with quotes and paraphrases. So also note the quote transitions here. There's a template within the template. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum, so not exactly, a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote small, it should sound conversational, as my writing does. You just got to use brackets sometimes to keep it conversational. So you quote, you analyze. Halliday's syntax creates a no-duh effect in that the tacit connection is supposed to be obvious. Laying down a long series of independent clauses, the tone is almost emphatic as Halliday claims that the symmetry between the two things is a no-brainer. Logic-driven, we are reminded on 3 separate occasions that all this is understandable. So what's the green? The green is the thesis, it's the theme. So that's what I'm talking about now. I had orange for the tone, right? Up here, the tone, and I identified the tone. I'm into the theme. Now I quoted, let's analyze. In instances where divorce is involved and it's the father's night to have custody of the kids, understandability fills the pizza shop so thoroughly there's no room for anything else. Right? I'm noticing the fact that understandable and understandability are repeated 3 times. That's like the main thesis. That one word is where the thesis hinges. Even the frequent use of the so conjunction highlights this point. So I put a blue Skittle there because, oops, I went the wrong way, because I'm talking about conjunctions and enjambment with the blue Skittle. So I still have enjambment left to do. As he proceeds through his argument, Halliday logically draws the following inferences. So the divorced father takes the kid and the kid's friend out for pizza. It's always this way. Dad can't cook, dad is nursing his wounds, and to lessen the potential pain, the kid's friend tags along to take some of the burden off the father. And when working through the crust is basically a chore. A divorced father can only do but one thing, so you leave it. All right, focus on that conjunction still focusing on the theme. So I could even have some more green Skittle down in here. Even the enjambment reinforces the frequency and perpetuity of such commonplace scenes. So I got a lot of quoting, a lot of paraphrasing in here. And basically the moral is this. As kids write, they are going to glue down their colored Skittles for their devices, terms, and techniques. And then as they get into the second premise, it's still all one body paragraph. I want to see quotes and paraphrases for each of the colors that they dropped in the first premise. And notice mine's long. I'm just modeling. I'm just showing them exactly how to do it. It's on the long side. I know that. But then you got to wrap it up. So the conclusion of a syllogistic body paragraph just takes a couple of sentences. I just wrap it back thematically to the prompt and the thesis. Sadly, divorce has become part of the mundanity of family existence in our society. As such, divorced fathers and pizza crusts have become inextricably linked. And that's it. So it took me, I think I went over 12 sentences by 2. That was like 14 sentences, but you get the gist. I'm just modeling how to do it, showing you and students how to cobble that together. So the next question is this. What do I do next? Because you got to write more than, one body paragraph for a poetry analysis, especially on the FRQs in the lit exam. So my students typically do intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion for timed writings on exams. So all 6 FRQs for Lang and lit is 4 paragraphs. So what do I do next? They just bust out another syllogism. So keep going. There's still a whole bunch more in this poem that you got to analyze. And you just start again with your rainbow. So look at my first premise here. 3 sentences, choose new terms, devices, techniques. In many regards, the unwanted and unpalatable pizza crust becomes synonymous with untenable marriages. Right? So again, we're really going to focus on that juxtaposition in this one, the idea of the metaphor. Metaphorically, one discards the inedible as casually as they do their marriages. On a logical plane, it's obvious and to be tacitly understood given its frequent occurrence among the multitude of fathers frequenting pizza shops on their nights of custody. Red, orange, yellow. So I'm going to need quotes and paraphrases for the juxtaposition, quotes, paraphrases for the metaphor, quotes and paraphrases for the logic, the logos, the theme, whatever you want to call it, right? The main exigence of the piece. And then I just align them. So I'm going to need red, orange, and yellow in my second premise, and my conclusion is going to look just like what I just modeled. So that is how to make an edible Skittles template, and graphic organizer. So if you would like these slides, reach out at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I can pass them on to you. Also note that I'm deeply involved with the National Writing Project, and our cadence going forward is on a monthly basis. We're going to be doing these one-off courses. They're either going to be 90 minutes or 2-hour courses. And on December 10th, 2022, I have a course called Teaching Line of Reasoning 2-Hour Intensive. I had to think of the title there for a second. So Teaching Line of Reasoning 2-Hour Intensive. And I'm going to show all my wackadoodle tricks on incorporating children's stories, my edible templates, edible graphic organizers, and my gamification methods to get students to sustain nice, tight, cogent lines of reasoning. If you want more information on that, you can go to teachinghowtowrite.com. You can enroll, and there's more information there. And also note that the National Writing Project is awarding completion badges for those that need professional development hours. So also on my website there, teachinghowtowrite.com, you can get information on my masterminds, the live ones, and the self-paced course, and stay abreast of the forthcoming one-offs that we're doing the months down the road from us here. So hopefully you found that to be useful. Happy teaching, happy writing.